Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video takes us back to the Xtreme Dirt Tour and the dirt track at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. This is another one of the bull ring style dirt tracks, meaning that it is fairly short in length and offers a lot of opportunity for a lot of beating and banging with the AI. Unfortunately, the AI are not as competitive as I would like at this track, like many of the other tracks in the game, but we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. We're going to be talking about the setup, we're going to be talking about lap times and the track itself, so let's get to it. All right, before we get into the setup itself, let's talk a little bit about the track and about lap times. This is a smaller bull ring type track, as I mentioned, which means that it is very important to get the car rotated on entry. So basically you're pointed for a straight exit and you have to do very little turning of the steering wheel from the center of the corner off, and that helps you to maintain as much speed as you possibly can. Also, just like with all the other dirt tracks, you can run this track wide open if you desire. I have not set the car up to do that. That's not the way I prefer to drive it, but it is certainly doable and very much a possibility if you decide to do that. You can run multiple grooves here. You can run right around the bottom, which is my preferred groove, in the middle, or all the way up at the top. And you can carry a lot of speed around the top if you get the car set up for that. Again, I'm set up for mostly around the very bottom because that's the passing lane against the AI. As far as AI lap times, anything below about a 14.8 and you will dominate the AI. I've gotten down into, I think it's the 14.6s, somewhere, anywhere in that range, and you're going to dominate against the AI. So lap times really aren't that big of an issue. It's all about finding your comfort zone and figuring out how the setup feels best to you. Now, as far as the setup itself, the shock settings, the 3.5 bump and rebound setup works great for me. But again, I'm sure everybody has a little bit different feel that they're looking for from the shocks. Weight settings, we want maximum left side weight, and then my front weight or nose weight and wedge are both at 49.5. I wanted the car to be able to rotate and rotate pretty quickly because this is a shorter track. I need a quicker rotation on corner entry for the way I drive. So 49.5 works very well. If you find yourself getting too loose overall, or particularly on corner entry, then try moving that nose weight up to around 50 or 50.5 and see what kind of change that makes to the handling of the car, and that'll give you an idea of how much you want to use that particular setting. Same thing for the wedge. If you find that the car overall is not as stable as you would like or rotates too quickly, then increase that wedge number and that should help you out. Front and rear ride heights at 6 and 7 respectively, and as I've mentioned in previous videos, really with the ride height in this particular game, all you have to worry about is just not getting the car to bottom out, and other than that, you're pretty much fine. You can use it as an adjustment tool on the handling, but there are some other tools that I like better. Moving on to the springs, 280 and 240 in the left front and right front respectively. I love the maximum left front spring of 280. The left front doesn't do as much as you would like on the dirt cars. It doesn't get quite as much traction. But the right front spring is extremely important. The higher the number you use for the right front spring, the slower the rotation is going to be, particularly on corner entry. So if you want to tighten up the car very quickly, then increasing that right front spring will do it. And of course, the inverse is also true. If you want to get the car rotating quicker on corner entry, then lowering that right front spring will do the trick. So again, many different options in the setup to get the car to behave the way you want. So it just takes some testing to get the car to feel the way you want it to feel. In the rear of the car, 220 and 240, and only 20 pounds of rear spring split, simply because I do all of the rotating of the car on entry. So once I get the car rotated and I get back to the gas, because I'm not running it wide open, once I get back to the gas, I want the car to be very stable and basically drive straight off the corner with very little input from me as far as turning left or turning back to the right. And that 20 pounds of rear spring split works great for that. You can also use equal rear springs, and that will also accomplish that. But of course, it would also tighten up the car. Now, overall, In the rear of the car, I like to adjust the springs together once I find a good split between the rear springs. And the reason I do that is I know if I increase both of the rear springs together, so let's say increase 20 pounds on both the left rear and the right rear together, then that's going to make the rear of the car more dominant in the drive. It's going to make the car rotate more, particularly from the center of the corner off. And then if the car is a little bit too loose, and the rear of the car is driving the car a little bit too much, which is odd to say for a dirt car, but in this game, it's certainly possible, then I decrease both of the rear springs together. So if you've watched my other setup videos for the other dirt tracks in this Xtreme Dirt Tour, then you'll know that sometimes I use the maximum right rear spring and very close to that for the left rear, and sometimes I back off of that, and that's why I do that, just adjusting for how much rotation I want out of the rear of the car. Tire settings, 22, 23 pounds on the left side, and I run the maximum 30 pounds on the right side because that works well, but of course you can try any number of different combinations on the pressures and be just fine. Miscellaneous settings, I'm using maximum front camber on both the left front and the right front. That is to get the maximum turn to the left. I want this car to pull hard to the left on the straightaway, and that's because it helps it get through the corners quicker. So we'll deal with the pull to the left here in just a few moments when we talk about the steering offset. But moving on to the sway bar, the front sway bar 1.10 inches. This is a great tool for stabilizing the car, but you have to be careful about using too high of a number without being prepared to adjust some other settings, because the higher the number you use on the front sway bar, the tighter the car is going to be. Now that's great for stability if the car is very unstable for you, but it can also make the car to where it just won't rotate as much in this game in particular with a higher front sway bar. So keep that in mind as an adjustment tool. Moving on to the track bar, I'm using 12 inches left and right side on the track bar. And that is really about the balance of rotation of the car overall. If I want the car to rotate more, then I increase the track bar. If I want the car to rotate less, then I lower the track bar. That's an oversimplification of the track bar's purpose, but for our purposes, it will serve the need. Brake bias, I've used anything from 45 to 55% and sometimes even lower than the 45%. Just depending on how you want to drive the car. As I've mentioned in other dirt track videos for the Xtreme Dirt Tour, one of the possibilities for driving the car is to tap the brake on corner entry to help the car to rotate. And if you want to do that, that type of driving style, then you'll want to use a lower brake bias and play around with it to see the proper amount of rotation. So again, just another tool to use depending on how you want to drive the car. Moving on to the wheel lock, 15 degrees seems to work really good for me in the Xtreme Dirt Tour on these tracks, but I have used as high as the maximum, which I believe is 35 degrees. It just depends on how quickly you want the wheel response. If you want a very quick turn of the wheel with very little input from you, then use a higher number on the wheel lock. If you want more stability and slower rotation overall, then use a lower number on the wheel lock. For comparison purposes, most of the time on the asphalt, I'm anywhere from 10 to 12 degrees on this setting. And again, just because on the asphalt, I want the car to rotate a little bit slower because we have much bigger tracks overall. Now, the steering offset, as I mentioned briefly earlier, is its sole purpose is to offset that pull to the left that you feel on the straightaway from using the maximum front camber. So play around with this setting. If you get this setting too high, the car will actually start to pull to the right on the straightaway. So that's when you'll know that you've gone too far, but it is a great tuning tool as well. Moving on to the gear settings, and there is a lot of adjustability here. I didn't mess with the first or second gear. I stuck to the rear end ratio, and 5.14 worked perfectly fine, but you can find speed going down to, say, a 5.0. That'll turn fewer RPMs. You can also go up a little bit on this number into the 5.2s, maybe even 3s, but then you're pushing, really maxing out the RPMs and winding out the engine too much, which is generally not the fastest way to do it. So plenty of adjustability there, and it also works great as an adjustment tool for the setup overall. Not only does it fine-tune the RPMs, but if you have, if you're running more RPMs, then the car is going to be a little looser, particularly on throttle. If you're running fewer RPMs, meaning that you're lowering the rear end ratio to 5.0 or even getting down into the 4s, then that'll make fewer RPMs and also a tighter car under throttle. So a lot of different ways to accomplish the same goals, and that's a beautiful thing about race cars. A lot of different ways to get what you want out of the car. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more as we continue our NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming.